The fourth nun says, I'm not gonna gargle the holy water she uses to wash her ass. Ask Reddit on Reddit Rundown. What's the funniest joke you've ever heard? A man is brought to the gallows to be executed. As they're putting the noose around his neck, he's asked if he has any last requests. He asked for a high five. But they left him hanging. Way out in the old Wild West, a cowboy walks into a saloon, and sits down at the bar. After having a few drinks, he gets up, pays the bartender, and leaves. Moments later, he comes back in and says, I'm going to sit down and have one more drink, and if my horse ain't back where I left it by the time I'm done, I'm gonna have to do what I done in Texas. Everyone in the saloon looks nervously at each other as the cowboy does as he says, and has one last drink. Once more, he gets up, pays the bartender, and leaves. Outside, his horse is tied back up where he left it. He gets on his horse, and just as he's about to ride off, a timid customer comes out of the saloon and asks, Beg your pardon, sir, but what was it you done in Texas? The cowboy stares off into the distance for a moment or so, then finally he replies, I had to walk home. Two nuns are riding their bicycles through the village. One says, I've never come this way before. The other replies, Me neither, it must be the cobblestone. Four nuns arrive at the gates of St. Peter, but before they are allowed to pass on into heaven, they are told that they must cleanse themselves of any sins of their past life. The first nun walks up and St. Peter asks her, Tell me, what are your sins? The nun says, Well, when I was alive, I once saw a penis. St. Peter nods and directs her to a bowl of holy water. Wash your eyes clean of sin, my child. She does, and passes through the gate. The second nun walks up and St. Peter asks, What are your sins, my child? The second nun says, Well, when I was alive, I once touched a penis. And so, St. Peter guides her to the holy water and has her wash her hands and pass through the gate. As the third nun is walking up to speak with St. Peter, the fourth nun abruptly cuts in front of her. Surprised and confused, St. Peter asks, What is it, my child? The fourth nun says, I'm not gonna gargle the holy water she uses to wash her ass. Three men die and go to heaven. They meet St. Peter at the pearly gates. St. Peter looks at his notebook, then back to them and says, We have something interesting here. All three of you died at roughly the same time and in roughly the same place. However, I've filled my quota for today, and so I can only let two of you three into heaven. So, I'm just going to have each of you tell me how you died. We'll start with you, he says, pointing to the first man. The first man says, Well, it's a bit of a sad story. I've been married to this beautiful woman for years now, absolutely amazing gal. But I started to get the impression that she was cheating on me. So, one night I came home early from work, and I saw a new coat and shoes by the door. Already not a good sign. I muster up the courage and open the door to my wife's room. She's there, alone. I breathe a sigh of relief, until I look out our apartment window and see a guy dangling from our balcony by his arms. At that point, I just see red. I grab a brick that was laying on the counter and I rush outside and start smashing his fingers. He lets go and falls 3 stories to the ground. I look down, he's still twitching. So I run back inside and, in a fit of pure rage, I pulled the refrigerator out of the wall and threw it off the balcony. But in all of the exertion and stress, I suffered a heart attack and died on the spot. And now I'm here. Ah, that is a sad story, St. Peter says. He turns to the next man in line, and how did you die, sir? Well, I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding here, the second man says. I was on my 4th floor balcony, doing stretches and calisthenics. I like to keep fit. But during one exercise where I had my leg up on the railing, my leg slipped and I fell off. I managed to catch hold of my downstairs neighbor's balcony, and I breathed a huge sigh of relief. My neighbor comes out, and I think he's coming to help me, but then he starts smashing my fingers with this brick. I have no choice, I have to let go. I fall all the way to the ground. That's when I realized, I wasn't dead. I might actually make it if I get some medical attention. But then a freaking refrigerator falls on top of my head. And then I died. St. Peter looks visibly disturbed at this point. Oh my. He says, turning to the third man in line. And how did you die, sir? The third man says, well, I don't know if this is related. So I was sleeping with this other man's wife, see. But then we heard her husband coming home, so I hid in the refrigerator. Her husband. Two Irishmen are stranded out in the ocean. After floating for weeks, the food stores are running low. One of them spots a lamp floating in the water. They fish it out and start cleaning it when a genie pops out. The genie says, you woke me up from a nice nap, but rules are rules. I'll grant you one wish. Choose wisely. Without even thinking, one of them shouts, I wish the whole ocean were made of Guinness. It is done. The genie says and disappears. The second man looks at the first and say, you effing idiot, now we have to piss in the boat. I have tested this, and it is funniest if you look up the verses yourself, truly. A pastor moves to a new town, and the day before services, he goes to visit members of his new congregation. He comes to one house and knocks. No answer. He rings the doorbell. No answer. But he can tell someone is home. So, he pulls out a card and writes on the back, Revelation 3:20, puts the card in the door, and moves on. The next day, after services, he finds the card in the offering plate, and on it is now also written Genesis 3:10. He goes to his Bible, reads, and lets out a hearty laugh. Again, it is truly funnier if you look it up yourself, but if you're truly too lazy to. Revelation 3:20 Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if any man hears me, and lets me in, I will sup with him, and he with me. Genesis 3:10 Yea, I heard thy voice in the garden, and was afraid, for I was naked. I was a very happy person. My wonderful girlfriend and I had been dating for over a year, and so we decided to get married. There was only one little thing bothering me. It was her beautiful younger sister. My prospective sister-in-law was 22, wore very tight miniskirts, and generally was braless. She would regularly bend down when she was near me, and I always got more than a nice view. It had to be deliberate because she never did it when she was near anyone else. One day her little sister called and asked me to come over to check the wedding invitations. She was alone when I arrived, and she whispered to me that she had feelings and desires for me that she couldn't overcome. She told me that she wanted me just once before I got married and committed my life to her sister. Well, I was in total shock, and couldn't say a word. She said, I'm going upstairs to my bedroom, and if you want one last wild fling, just come up and get me. No one will know I was stunned and frozen in shock as I watched her go up the stairs. I stood there for a moment, then turned and made a beeline straight to the front door. I opened the door and headed straight towards my car. Lo and behold, my entire future family was standing outside, all clapping. With tears in his eyes, my father-in-law hugged me and said, we are very happy that you have passed our little test. We couldn't ask for a better man for our daughter. Welcome to the family. The moral of this story is, always keep the condoms in your car. There's this guy driving, and he's going pretty fast. He ends up getting pulled over by a highway patrolman. The officer walks up to his car and notices the backseat is full of penguins. He approaches the door and says, hey, what are you doing with all these penguins? These penguins need to go to the zoo. The man agrees, then drives off. It's a rural area, and the man is speeding again the very next day. He ends up being pulled over by the same officer. The officer walks to the driver's window and again sees the penguins in the backseat. He says, what are you doing with all these penguins? I told you to take them to the zoo. The driver says, I did. We had so much fun, we're going back today. An Englishman, an Irishman and a Scotsman walk into a bar and each order a pint. They grab their beers and sit down, but 3 flies come down and each land on a glass and take a sip of beer. The Englishman pushes his drink aside and asks for a new one. The Scotsman flicks away the fly and drinks his pint. The Irishman grabs the fly, pins it to the table and punches it repeatedly while yelling, spit it out, you bastard. 3 guys are hiking through the woods when they find a lamp. One of them picks it up, rubs it, and out pops a genie. It booms, you have finally freed me after all these years, so I'll grant each one of you 3 wishes. The first guy immediately blurts out, I want $1 billion. Poof, he's holding a printout that shows his account balance is now in fact $1,003.50. The second man thinks for a bit, then says, I want to be the richest man alive. Poof, he's holding papers showing his net worth is now well over $100 billion. The third guy thinks even longer about his wish, then says I want my left arm to rotate clockwise for the rest of my life. Poof, his arm starts rotating. The genie tells them it's time for their second wish. First guy says, I want to be married to the most beautiful woman on earth. Poof, a stunning beauty wraps herself around his arm. Second guy says I want to be good looking and charismatic, so I can have every girl I want. Poof, his looks change and the first guy's wife immediately starts flirting with him. Third guy says I want my right arm to rotate counterclockwise until I die. Poof, now both his arms are rotating, in opposite directions. The genie tells them to think very carefully about their third wish. First guy does, and after a while says I never want to become sick or injured, I want to stay healthy until I die. Poof, his complexion improves, his acne is gone and his knees don't bother him anymore. Second guy says I never want to grow old. I want to stay 29 forever. Poof, he looks younger already. Third guy smiles triumphantly and says my last wish is for my head to nod back and forth. Poof, he's now nodding his head and still flailing his arms around. The genie wishes them good luck, disappears, and the men soon go their separate ways. Many years later they meet again and chat about how things have been going. First guy is ecstatic, I've invested the money and multiplied it many times over, so me and my family will be among the richest of the rich pretty much forever. My wife is a freak in the sheets, and I've never gotten so much as a cold in all these years. Second guy smiles and says well, I built charities worldwide with a fraction of my wealth, I'm still the richest guy alive and also revered for my good deeds. I haven't aged a day since we last met, and yes, your wife is pretty wild in bed. Third guy walks in, flailing his arms around and nodding his head, and says, guys, I think I fucked up. There were three friends, Pedro, Juan, and Jose. They got lost in a forest and accidentally ran into an evil magician. He said he will help them leave but they have to do his challenge first. If they fail, they will be instantly beheaded. Desperate to get out, they agreed. The first thing the magician asked them to do was find 10 fruits of the same kind. He didn't explain what they were for, but the three friends immediately went and searched for the best kinds in the forest. Pedro was the first to get back, holding 10 ripe, very juicy looking, and shiny apples in his arms. Well done, said the magician. Now I will reveal the next part of the challenge. You have to put all the 10 fruits up your butt while keeping a poker face on. Make a slight flinch, squeal, or giggle, you will die. Having no choice left, Pedro proceeded to start with the first apple. Immediately, he screamed in pain. Schwack! Pedro's head falls to the ground as the magician swings his sword. Juan arrives next, holding in his hand 10 pieces of grapes. Upon receiving the same instruction from the magician, he exclaims, ha! I won't suffer like Pedro. He brought large apples, but I only brought grapes. This will be easy. And so he begins. Grape after grape, Juan maintains his poker face and doesn't even flinch as he goes through the 7th, the 8th, the 9th grape. As Juan was about to get to his final grape, he suddenly busted out laughing very hard. Schwack! Juan's head falls to the ground as the magician swings his sword. In heaven, Pedro looks at Juan as he arrives. What happened? You were doing so well with the 9 grapes. Why did you start laughing? Juan replies, well, I saw Jose in the distance coming back with 10 jackfruits. I saw oldie but goodie, 2 factory workers, Sally and Billy, are talking. Sally says, I can make the boss give me the day off. Billy questions, and how would you do that? Sally says, just wait and see. She then hangs upside down from the ceiling. The boss comes in and says, what are you doing? Sally yells down, I'm a light bulb. The boss then says, you've been working so much that you've gone crazy. I think you need to take the day off. Billy starts to follow her and the boss says, where are you going? Billy replies, I'm going home, too. I can't work in the dark. I have another one. John was lying as a meadow questioning his existence. He then said, God, are you there? To his surprise, God replied yes. He begins asking God questions. What is a minute like for you? Knowing John would not understand the concept of infinity, God replied, a minute to me is a million years. Wow, John said. He asked another question. What is $1 million like to you? God replied, $1 million to me is like a penny. Wow, John said. Can I have one of your pennies? God replied, sure thing, just a minute. Thanks for listening to Reddit Rundown. Give a thumbs up and subscribe, and help me get to 1,000 subs. Leave a comment below on what kind of topics or stories you would like to hear. You can also check out other videos on my channel. Thanks and have an awesome day.